You expected a warm family brunch, a chance to share stories, laughter, and maybe a little comfort. Instead, you got the moment that rewrote your entire life. The table sparkled with crystal glasses and polished silver, yet nothing shined brighter than the sting of your mother's words. "You're lucky we even include you." She didn't whisper. She said it where everyone could hear, as if your presence was nothing more than charity. In that instant, the food lost its taste, the chatter blurred, and the ground beneath you seemed to shift. What should have been a celebration became the spark of betrayal and the first chapter of your family revenge story. If you've ever been dismissed by the people meant to protect you, stay close because this story will speak to you. You expected a warm family brunch, a chance to share stories, laughter, and maybe a little comfort. Instead, you got the moment that rewrote your entire life. The table sparkled with crystal glasses and polished silver, yet nothing shined brighter than the sting of your mother's words. "You're lucky we even include you." She didn't whisper. She said it where everyone could hear, as if your presence was nothing more than charity. In that instant, the food lost its taste, the chatter blurred, and the ground beneath you seemed to shift. What should have been a celebration became the spark of betrayal and the first chapter of your family revenge story. The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgettable. You tried to swallow, but the food on your plate felt heavy, tasteless. Around you, forks clinked against china, glasses chimed with laughter, and yet the only sound you could hear was her voice repeating in your mind. "You're lucky we even include you." That moment was more than a sting. It was a mirror. It reflected years of being on the edge of your own family, years of feeling like a guest rather than a daughter. And as you sat at that table, frozen, memories began to flood back, memories you had tried to bury but could no longer ignore. As a child, you thought family meant safety. You thought it meant being chosen again and again, without condition. You remember running through the old cabin by the lake, your grandmother's laughter echoing through its wooden halls. She told you stories about resilience, about how dignity was the only inheritance that truly mattered. To you, she was a fortress, soft in her embrace, yet unshakable in her beliefs. Those summers felt endless. You played on the worn porch steps, you listened to the hum of crickets at night, and you believed that no matter what happened, this family would always hold you. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was a symbol. It was the one place where you felt completely yourself. But even then, small cracks began to show. Your brother Nathan was the golden child. From the moment he was born, attention shifted. Where you were praised quietly, he was celebrated loudly. Report cards became competitions you never agreed to enter, but always seemed to lose. Birthdays tilted in his favor, his gifts grander, his parties brighter. You tried to shrug it off, telling yourself it was just the way things were. But with every passing year, the gap widened. Teachers praised his charm. Relatives admired his boldness. And at every family gathering, the conversations circled back to him, as though your accomplishments were little more than footnotes. At first, you fought for recognition, working harder, excelling in your own quiet way. But the harder you tried, the less they seemed to see you. Slowly, you stopped pushing. You learned to retreat, to let the spotlight shine where they wanted it. Yet deep inside, you carried a quiet ache. The desire not to outshine, but simply to belong. When your grandmother passed, everything changed. Her cabin, once the heart of family unity, became a point of division. You had hoped it would remain a sanctuary, a place of shared memory. Instead, it became a bargaining chip in whispered conversations, a symbol of power rather than love. Your mother grew colder. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, now carried calculation. She spoke more of appearances than of feelings, more of legacy than of bonds. Your father followed her lead, silent but complicit, his loyalty tied not to fairness but to convenience. And you became the outsider within your own home. For 35 years, you gave. You gave time, patience, and effort that often went unnoticed. You attended gatherings even when you knew you'd be seated at the edge. You contributed quietly to bills, to upkeep, to family needs, even when gratitude never came your way. You were the one who remembered birthdays no one remembered for you. The one who showed up when emergencies struck, who rearranged your life to accommodate those. And yet, when the conversations turned toward real contributions, close quote, your name was rarely, if ever, spoken. You convinced yourself it didn't matter, that true love asked for nothing in return. But deep down, the imbalance carved wounds that only grew deeper with time. And then came the truth you could no longer deny. Nathan's charm was a mask. Behind it lay debts, reckless spending, and decisions that endangered not only him but the family's finances. You watched as your parents shielded him, covering mistake after mistake, even as it drained resources meant for everyone. You saw accounts emptied, plans postponed, and still they defended him. His failures were explained away as bad luck, close quote, his choices softened with words like just a phase. But when it came to you, there was no such grace. Every misstep of yours was magnified. Every boundary you set was labeled selfish. Every attempt to stand your ground was turned into a character flaw. The double standard was impossible to ignore, yet you stayed hoping, perhaps naively, that one day they would see the truth. That morning, when you dressed for the family brunch, you told yourself it would be like any other. You braced for subtle digs, for Nathan's exaggerated stories, for your mother's pointed reminders of what you hadn't achieved. You told yourself you could handle it. But you weren't prepared for the words she chose. When she leaned across the table, her eyes sharp, and declared, "You're lucky we even include you," close quote, it wasn't just an insult. It was confirmation. Confirmation that after decades of sacrifice, after a lifetime of showing up, you were still nothing more than an afterthought. You felt the air drain from your lungs. Around you, glasses clinked, forks scraped, conversations carried on. No one defended you. No one contradicted her. And in that silence, you realized the truth. Your family didn't just fail to see you. They had chosen not to. As you sat there, replaying her words, you felt something shift. The ache that had lived inside you for years began to harden. It was no longer about waiting for acceptance, no longer about hoping for recognition. It was about dignity, about refusing to be treated as less than what you were. Your grandmother's voice echoed in your memory. Dignity is the only inheritance worth keeping. And in that instant, you understood what she meant. You didn't need their approval. You didn't need their validation. What you needed was the courage to stand, to claim your worth, to refuse to play the role they had written for you. The brunch ended, but the words remained. They followed you home, filling the silence of every room, echoing with every breath. And instead of breaking you, they built something new inside you. Resolve. Resolve that this story would not end with you bowed. Resolve that the power they tried to take from you would be reclaimed. You didn't know it yet, but that brunch was the spark. It wasn't just a wound. It was the beginning of your transformation. What started as humiliation would become the fuel for something greater. And soon, you would show them that being included was not a gift they could give or take away, it was a choice you would claim for yourself. You left the brunch with a smile plastered on your face, but inside you were hollow. Every step toward the door felt heavy, as though each footfall dragged the weight of those words behind you. "You're lucky we even include you." They echoed louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the shallow laughter that had surrounded you all afternoon. At home, the silence greeted you like an old companion. You sat alone, the glow of the afternoon sun spilling across the floorboards, trying to piece together how your family could dismiss you so easily. But the truth was, this wasn't sudden. It had been building for years, only now spoken aloud. That sentence hadn't appeared out of nowhere, it was the culmination of 1,000 smaller slights, 1,000 looks and whispers that told you where you stood. As the days passed, you replayed that brunch in your mind. You recalled Nathan smirking at your expense, your parents sitting calmly as though nothing cruel had been said. It wasn't just the words, it was the silence that followed them, the silence of people who didn't rush to your defense, because they didn't believe you were worth defending. Then came the discovery that turned hurt into fury. One evening, while helping sort through family papers at the cabin, you came across documents that froze you in place. Blueprints. Proposals. Financial agreements. They weren't for preserving the cabin your grandmother loved. They were for gutting it. Her library, the shelves she had filled with books and journals over decades, was marked to be demolished, replaced by a lounge Nathan had designed for himself. You traced the lines of ink with your finger, your chest tightening. The cabin wasn't just a building, it was history, memory, and the one place you still felt close to her. To erase it was to erase the only corner of the world where you had belonged. You confronted your mother the next morning. "Is it true?" Close quote, you asked, holding the papers out with trembling hands. She barely glanced at them before replying coolly, "That space is wasted. Nathan has plans. He's the one who knows how to build a future for this family." Her words cut deeper than any blueprint could. Wasted. That's what she thought of the room where your grandmother had once read you stories, where you had hidden away with books to escape the chaos of a house that never seemed to see you. To her, those memories weren't sacred. They were disposable. Nathan appeared in the doorway then, grinning, his confidence radiating. "It'll be amazing," close quote, he said, brushing past you as if your presence were irrelevant. "Finally, the cabin will serve a purpose." You wanted to scream that it already had a purpose, that it had been the heart of your childhood. But looking at their faces, you realized it wouldn't matter. They had already chosen. The injustice burned. It wasn't just about the room. It was about what it represented. The erasure of everything tied to you, everything that didn't serve Nathan's ambitions. You were watching, in real time, as your history was rewritten to exclude you. In the weeks that followed, the divide grew sharper. Family dinners became showcases of Nathan's ideas. Your parents spoke of his projects as though they were the only things worth admiring. And whenever you tried to speak up, your words slid off them like water on glass. Yet through it all, you endured. You showed up. You contributed. You helped maintain the cabin, even as its future slipped further out of your hands. Because somewhere deep inside, you still hoped for recognition, for someone to acknowledge your worth before it was too late. But hope, you learned, can be a dangerous thing. The breaking point came on a crisp autumn afternoon. You arrived at the cabin to find workers already moving in equipment, measuring walls, preparing to dismantle the library. Your stomach turned as you realized they hadn't even told you it was happening. The decision had been made without you. You marched to your parents, demanding an explanation. Your father, who rarely spoke in such matters, cleared his throat awkwardly. It's for the best. Nathan knows what he's doing. He'll carry the family forward. Your mother's voice followed, firm and dismissive. You have your place, but you need to understand this family depends on Nathan. Don't stand in the way. Don't stand in the way. As if you were an obstacle, not a daughter. You felt the air leave your lungs. You wanted to argue, to lay bare every truth you knew about Nathan, the debts, the reckless choices, the whispers of creditors. But you saw the look in their eyes. They wouldn't believe you. They didn't want to. Believing you would mean admitting they had chosen wrong, and that was something they would never do. So you stayed silent. Outwardly, you nodded, but inside, something hardened. The brunch had wounded you, but this attempt to erase the last sanctuary of your grandmother ignited something deeper. It wasn't just about dignity anymore. It was about justice. You began to watch more closely, noticing details you'd overlooked before. Financial records that didn't add up, you see. You weren't ready to strike yet. But you knew the time would come. One night, as you stood in the library alone, running your hand along the spines of books soon to be removed, you whispered a promise into the silence. They won't erase this. They won't erase me. That vow settled in your chest like stone, unmovable and certain. The family thought they had silenced you at the brunch. They thought they had erased you with their plans. But they were wrong. Because in that silence, in that erasure, you found the spark of something stronger. Not just endurance. Not just survival. But the beginning of your revenge story. The vow you whispered in the library did not fade, it grew stronger with every passing day. You returned often, tracing your fingers along the shelves, memorizing the scent of old wood and paper, as though each book carried the strength of your grandmother herself. Every time you stood there, you felt her presence reminding you. Dignity is not given, it is claimed. Meanwhile, Nathan's world began to show cracks. The charm that once dazzled relatives now looked strained, forced. You overheard phone calls laced with urgency, his voice low and clipped. One night, while walking past the porch, you caught fragments. I'll get it, don't worry, just give me more time. His hand trembled as he hung up, his eyes darting when he realized you had heard. You said nothing. Silence became your greatest weapon. In family meetings, your parents continued to paint Nathan as the savior of the legacy. They praised his vision, close quote, his dedication, close quote, even as his proposals grew more reckless. When numbers didn't add up, you quietly recorded them. When his promises contradicted his actions, you noted the dates and times. Piece by piece, you were building something they could not deny. The truth. But truth alone doesn't shatter illusions, it needs a moment, a stage. That moment arrived sooner than you expected. It was a Sunday evening, another dinner in the grand dining room where laughter was polished and smiles rehearsed. Nathan arrived late, his shirt untucked, his eyes red from sleepless nights. He slid into his seat with a grin too wide, pouring himself a drink before anyone could ask questions. Your mother glanced at him, worry flickering in her eyes before she quickly masked it with praise. Nathan has been working tirelessly. His new project will elevate us all. You watched the scene unfold, the way she shielded him from scrutiny. And then you spoke, not loudly, not angrily, but with a calmness that demanded attention. What project, exactly? Close quote. The room fell silent. Nathan froze, his glass halfway to his lips. Your father shifted uncomfortably, your mother's smile faltered. You pressed on. Because from what I've seen, there are no investors, no contracts, only debts. Am I wrong? Close quote. Nathan's grin collapsed. For the first time, the mask slipped. Your mother's voice cracked as she tried to regain control. That's enough. We won't tolerate accusations in this house. But you didn't back down. This isn't an accusation. It's fact. I've seen the letters. I've heard the calls. He isn't saving this family, he's sinking it. Your father's fork clattered onto his plate. Nathan muttered excuses, fumbling for words that once came easily. And in that moment, you felt the balance shift. They could dismiss your feelings. They could dismiss your presence. But they could no longer dismiss the evidence. That night ended in chaos, raised voices, slammed doors, accusations flying not at you but at each other. You stood at the edge of the storm, silent but steady, knowing you had finally pierced the illusion. Days later, your mother came to you privately. Her face was pale, her voice subdued. Why are you doing this? We're supposed to be a family. You met her gaze without flinching. A family doesn't erase one of its own. A family doesn't destroy what was meant to be preserved. You chose Nathan's comfort over truth. "I won't let you take what little is left." She tried to argue, but the words faltered. Because deep down, she knew you were right. It wasn't long before Nathan's collapse could no longer be hidden. Creditors arrived at the door. Projects were exposed as illusions. The very foundation your parents had trusted began to crumble. And through it all, you stood tall, not with glee, not with cruelty, but with the quiet strength of someone who had endured long enough. The library became your sanctuary, not just in memory but in action. You filed legal claims, securing your grandmother's will, ensuring the cabin could not be altered without your consent. It wasn't just about books and shelves. It was about proving that her legacy, and by extension, yours, could not be erased. One evening, standing in that familiar room, your father entered quietly. He looked older than you remembered, weighed down by disappointment, not in you, but in the son he had defended so fiercely. For the first time, he spoke words you had waited decades to hear. "We were wrong." You didn't answer immediately. The ache of years could not be soothed by 3 words. But you nodded, acknowledging the shift. Because acknowledgement, however late, still mattered. Your mother never said the same. Pride kept her silent, even as the truth unfolded before her eyes. Yet her silence no longer pierced you. You no longer needed her validation to define your worth. What you needed, you had already found. Dignity, resilience, and the courage to walk your own path. The branch had humiliated you. The library plans had threatened to erase you. But in the end, both became the foundation of your transformation. And as you closed the door to the library one evening, the scent of old wood filling your lungs, you whispered again, "They won't erase me." This time, it wasn't a promise. It was a truth already fulfilled. Your revenge story wasn't about destroying them. It was about surviving them. About proving that while they had tried to reduce you to an afterthought, you had risen into the center of your own life. And in that rising, you discovered the sweetest form of victory. Peace. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Days turned into weeks, and the house that once buzzed with Nathan's promises and your mother's defenses now felt muted. Their voices no longer carried the same authority. Every time you entered a room, they looked away, not because you were invisible, but because you had become undeniable. Nathan kept his distance. His calls grew fewer, his visits shorter. The creditors he once outran had caught up, and without your parents' endless protection, his empire of illusions collapsed quickly. The confidence he had worn like armor crumbled, and with it went the role he had held over the family. You didn't rejoice in his downfall. Instead, you observed quietly, steady in the knowledge that the truth had finally spoken for itself. For years, you had begged to be heard. Now, without raising your voice, you had become the one no one could ignore. Your mother, however, remained trapped in silence. She moved through the house like a shadow, clinging to pride that no longer served her. Sometimes she glanced at you as though searching for the child who once sought her approval. But you were no longer that child. You were the woman who had withstood her neglect and come out stronger. One evening, she approached you in the kitchen. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "I never meant for it to come to this." You set down your glass, meeting her gaze steadily. But it did. She opened her mouth to argue, to explain, but the words never came. For once, she seemed to understand that excuses would not erase the past. You turned away, not in anger, but in release. You no longer needed her to admit fault. The power her words once held over you had dissolved. The cabin became more than a refuge, it became a symbol of your resilience. You spent hours restoring the library, repairing shelves, polishing the wood your grandmother had touched. Each book you dusted, each page you turned, was an act of defiance and an act of healing. The room no longer belonged to a family that dismissed you. It belonged to you and the legacy you carried forward. Friends who visited noticed the change in you. They remarked on the steadiness in your voice, the calm in your eyes. They didn't know the full story, but they sensed the transformation. You weren't defined by exclusion anymore, you were defined by strength. Still, the family gatherings continued, though smaller and more restrained. At one dinner, your mother tried to resume her old role, placing Nathan at the center of conversation. But the room felt different now. Each praise she offered for him fell flat, unsupported. Your father shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. And then, unexpectedly, all eyes turned to you. You didn't need to boast. You didn't need to recount the choices you had made, the strength you had found. Your silence carried more weight than their words ever had. And in that silence, they recognized the shift. You were no longer the outsider. You were the center they had tried to erase. The sweetest revenge was not in their downfall, but in your rise. Months later, you received a letter, formal, apologetic, from the family attorney. It confirmed what you already knew in your heart. The cabin was legally yours, protected by the will your grandmother had written. She had seen you clearly, even when others chose not to. Her trust had always been with you. Holding that letter, you felt tears well in your eyes, not of sorrow, but of relief. The legacy of dignity she had spoken of was now in your hands, untouchable. Nathan never regained his former glory. He drifted further, chasing opportunities that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. Your parents grew quieter, their authority diminished by their own choices. And you, once a daughter lucky to be included, became the one they could no longer overlook. But the real victory wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving yourself right. About knowing that you had always been worthy, even when they refused to see it. One afternoon, as the sun set over the lake, you sat on the porch of the cabin with a book in your lap. The air was still, the water reflecting the sky's golden hues. For the first time in decades, you felt at peace, not because the past had vanished, but because it no longer defined you. Your grandmother's voice echoed in your memory. Dignity is the only inheritance worth keeping. And you realized she had been right all along. The cabin, the library, even a family name, all of it mattered less than the strength you had found within yourself. As twilight deepened, you whispered into the quiet, not as a vow but as a truth. I am not erased. I never was. And with that, your story reached its true ending, not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with the quiet triumph of resilience. The kind of ending where you rise, not to destroy, but to live free. That was the victory they never expected. That was your family revenge story. In the quiet that followed, you finally understood. The true measure of victory was not in their recognition, but in your own clarity. You had lived through years of being pushed aside, spoken over and overlooked, yet here you stood stronger, steadier and free. The legacy your grandmother entrusted to you was not just the cabin or the library. It was the belief that dignity cannot be erased, no matter how many times others try. You no longer needed their approval, their validation, or their apologies. What once would have shattered you had instead shaped you. The silence that once weighed you down now carried peace. And with every page you turned in the library, every breath you took in that cabin, you felt the truth settle deeper. You were never the problem. You were always the strength they underestimated. As the sun dipped low across the lake, you closed your book and looked outward, knowing your story no longer belonged to the shadows of the past. It belonged to the future you were creating, a future built not on exclusion, but on self-worth. And now, a question lingers. If it had been your family, if you had heard those words at that table, how would your family revenge story have ended? Or how would your family revenge story have ended? Or how would your family revenge story have ended? Or how would your family revenge story have ended? Or how would your family revenge story have ended? Or how would